Welcome to the final lecture video, lecture 4 for week 5 in BUS302, Retail Management. And this week we are talking about retail strategy and technology and how we can use technology to create that sustainable competitive advantage. Now, in our first lecture, we talked about the supply chain and gave you an overview of what that is, and then talked about how we can use technology to create that competitive advantage by linking our systems with our vendors and making sure that we have less inventories, lower overstock, and using technology will help reduce that overstock, and it'll also help us improve our in-stock or those, get rid of those out of stocks, right? So we talked a little bit about that. We then also talked about how we can use technology to find out what our customers want and how we can use that same technology to manage the relationship that we have with our consumers by collecting data, analyzing it, right? And then figuring out, okay, what is it that our customers want and managing that relationship. And with that, we also use the example of retail analytics, the work of Andrew Poole and what he's done for Target. The goal of that, of course, is to move our customers from, that introductory level customer to a long-term high-value customer. Now, part of that whole process, of course, is understanding what our customers expect for customer service. And so we find out what they expect, and then we also measure what they're experiencing, right? So we ask them to evaluate their experience. And the goal of doing that is saying, you know what, we really want to provide a high quality customer service experience to all of our consumers, right? But to do that, we understand there is going to be a service gap. In other words, there's going to be some sort of gap that we're going to have to overcome and something that we're going to have to fix long term, right? So when we talk about that, we measure our customer, what the customers are experiencing, what their expectations are, and everything else. And then we would look and say, okay, is it a knowledge gap? Is it something that our people don't know? Is it a standards gap where we don't have the right standard? Maybe we aren't delivering right, or maybe there's just a communication type thing. So we look at those things, right? So when we talk about this service gap, we are talking about what the customer's perception is of the service being delivered, right? And they're saying, okay, here's the perception. How is that different than what your expectation was? So the perception versus expectation, right? So it could be the knowledge gap, a standards gap, delivery gap, or communication gap. Now, this is where we talk about perception. Perception is what the customer is evaluating what their experience, how they're experiencing reality, right? And perception is reality. So what you perceive is real to you. It might not be the way everybody else sees it. It may not be how your neighbor sees it, but it is how you see it. It is your reality. And that is an important piece to understand. So this means that we need to know what the customers want. So if we don't know what our customers want, right, we can't give it to them. So there's a knowledge gap here, right? So if we don't know what you want, we can't give it to you. So this is where we may go to social media. We may do some sentiment analysis, seeing what your sentiment is. We could use surveys, we could use panels. We could talk with customers directly or observe them, right? We'd look through our customer complaints. We'd ask for feedback from store employees. We could do some customer service research, right? So if you get that, it seems like whenever I interact with somebody today on services or maybe a more high-touch experience, I get and you'll receive a survey in the next day or two asking you about how I did, right? So, right, we're getting these surveys. We're wanting really what retailers and service providers want. They want to know how you perceive the experience of working with them. So this would be addressing the knowledge gap, right? So the other piece could be maybe it's a standards gap. So if we say that we are committed to high quality service and everything else, we say that, but are we really do our goals measure up? And this is where we might want to measure our service performance and ask consumers, hey, how are we doing? So this could be a mystery shopper experience, right? So using that mystery shopper experience, this is something I did as a administrative pastor, as the executive pastor at a church. I would use mystery shoppers to come into the church occasionally. Now, we talk about what do you mean, mystery shoppers at the church? I would find families that matched our target. This is who we expected, kind of our target for the church. I would find a family that didn't go to church and ask them to come visit. And then I'd have them fill out a form. They would fill out a form based on their experience. So we were able to determine, how well we did. So one of the things that we had at the church was our goal was really, we wanted to be a church where everybody felt welcome. I never been to a church where they're like, hey, we don't want you to be here, right? No, every church would say that, but are you doing it? And so when we talk about that, are you doing that? One of the things we asked them to measure, how long did it take you to be greeted by somebody when you came to the church? And so our goal was to have somebody meet you like at the door. We wanted greeters there. And then throughout the morning, we also wanted other people to interact with individuals. So those are things, service performance, that you could measure in using mystery shoppers. Now, one of the things, the meeting and exceeding service standards, right? So maybe it's a delivery gap, right? So in this case, this is where we need to help our employees or our members, right? We need to help them understand not only what the services are, but hey, this is what where we're at. So we need to empower our employees, empower our members, if it's like a nonprofit, to go out and do things, right? We need to support them, provide incentives, communicate with individuals and say, hey, this is how we're doing, right? Use technology as much as possible to improve this. So again, providing and delivering. So as we understand, as you go through, right? So maybe the standards, hey, the standard was wrong, right? Or maybe the expectation is people don't expect to be met at the front door, right? So if there's no expectation there, you don't need to do it, right? So understanding where we're at, these gaps that we need to figure out, right? And then finally, right, communicating the service promise. So the communication gap. How did we, what was the commitments that we made, and how did we manage those expectations? And these are things that are really, really important, is making realistic commitments and managing expectations. This is something that I work really hard on as a full-time college professor, right? When I'm working with students. So when I tell a student, you know what, I'll get back to you today. If I say, a student comes to me, they say, hey, I've got this issue. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll get back to you today. To me, that should be a realistic commitment. So if I say that, I should do it, right? If I don't do that, then I'm not, right? I'm not communicating well, and I'm not providing great service, right? So this is one of those things, the communication gap. When we communicate, are we saying what we mean, and are we meaning what we say, and does everybody understand these things? And by the way, communication is really, really hard, because everybody comes to a situation with their own, I hate to say baggage, but with their own stuff. So understanding what you're committing to, understanding what the expectation is, and everything else is so important. So being very clear in this. So the communication gap, do we have any problems there? So this would be managing expectations and making your realistic commitments. Now, again, all this technology is huge because it can help us enhance the customer experience. It helps us communicate with our customers. It helps us have that social presence, right? So it's no longer transactional, where you come to me and say, this is what I want, I give it to you. No, now we have an interactive experience. We're able to dialogue about things, find out what people really want, and develop this relationship that moves more long term and creates more value. That's, again, that idea of value, that key thing, right? So when we start looking at providing high quality service, right, convenience versus social presence, right? So if we map this out, right, convenience, you want high convenience, low convenience, and then the social presence, high social presence versus low social presence, right? So when we start talking about a high social presence, very low convenience, you're using things like the inventory robots, those kind of things. But now when we start looking at, and again, this is for different companies. So low social presence, high convenience self-checkouts, right? So we start looking at some of these areas. So these are some things that we're looking at. Smart shelves, right? Those are pretty cool, actually, where you have not just digital price tags, but as you go through, the smart shelves will tell you exactly how much something costs when you pull it off, put it in your cart, all those kind of things. All these areas, right? When you start talking about retail, how much social presence do you want? How much convenience, right? We have to balance these things out with our technology. Again, the key, listening to your customers. So as you go through this whole process and you're trying to provide high quality customer service, probably the best thing to do is listen to the customer, right? Demonstrate an interest in what they're saying. Don't interrupt them. And as you're going through and you don't want to argue with them, a customer is coming in and saying, hey, this happened and your people, and rather than say, well, I don't know that really happened, you can say, hey, what I'm hearing you say is that you're really upset about this because it made you feel like. So what you're doing is you're listening to them and you're showing empathy, right? And so the goal, again, is to provide a fair solution. Now, you're not going to be able to give a customer everything they want every time. The key that a customer really wants is they want to be heard, right? So if you listen, and then if you can go through a process with them that they perceive as fair, like, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how we're going to approach it. If they think that's fair and they don't see like it's a big burden to them, they're going to be happy. If they feel like as you go through this, you're not blaming them, you're taking ownership, right? These are some things that help them feel like you're coming to a fair solution. And finally, the key is how quickly can you resolve a problem, right? So the faster you can resolve a problem, the better off you're going to, everything's going to work out. The better off it's going to be in the long run because the customer is going to have good things to say, right? So the faster you resolve the problem, the better off. Now, in that whole process, one of the things that is easy to say that I learned in my own retail career is starting off and just going, man, I'm really sorry that you're going through this. This sounds right. And you do that active listening and you repeat to the customer what you hear them saying. That normally helps diffuse the situation really, really quickly. And so with that, you're able to then be perceived as providing high quality service. And that brings us to the end of our week 5 lectures on the retail strategy and technology. And where we're going to be going next week is we are going to be talking about retail strategy and financial outcomes. And so with that, have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you in the course home.